On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. My name is Don Davis, and I'm a consultant in life sciences. I help companies scale and manage complexity and increase performance. Today on the Life Science Success Podcast, I have Ross Jackson. Ross Jackson is literally the guy who wrote the book on patient recruitment on Facebook. So welcome, Ross.
Hi, Don. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thanks so much. Can you tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So, as you say, I'm literally the man who wrote the book on patient recruitment for clinical trials using Facebook ads. That's what I have on my LinkedIn profile. I live in Manchester in the northwest of England, which is where I am now. It's actually 10 o'clock in the evening here at the moment. And I've been writing about patient recruitment. That's my forte, is patient recruitment and retention, and giving sort of tips and advice on that since I started specializing in that several years ago.
Well, thanks so much for joining me so late at night. I greatly appreciate it. I know that I try and keep these at 5 Eastern time on a weekly basis, and I appreciate your flexibility in joining me. So it's my understanding that your initial focus was actually not patient recruitment in your career. Is that correct?
Yes, I started off doing digital marketing back in 1998. So that was before Google existed. So I was helping. I saw the internet and I thought, this will be useful to get involved in. So I was helping local businesses to promote themselves online by setting up websites. I actually started off building websites for local businesses. I wasn't particularly good at building the websites, but I had realized that someone would need to find them. So I was getting involved in search engine optimization in the early days. In those days, it wasn't Google, it was Alta Vista and things like that. But I made sure that all the sites I worked on were able to be found. One of my earliest clients was actually a doctor, private doctor's practice, which is where I did the very first patient recruitment job I did was back in 1998. Not for a trial, but it was a very similar type of thing. And then over the years, I developed more of a specialism in healthcare. And then several years ago, I got a job through an agency. I was been working freelance for myself for a long time. Got a job through an agency to recruit patients for a trial that was actually originally using Google Ads. So I started that. Facebook advertising had sort of started to come good at the time. So I thought, well, let's try this. So we did some Facebook ads and they were miles better than the Google ads. So I then focused on that for a while.
So did you find it harder to do search engine optimization before, or do you find it harder to do search engine optimization now?
I'm not really that involved in SEO now, but I understand the principles. And from what I keep in touch with several people I've met over the years, and my understanding is the basic principles are the same. When Google came along, obviously it became mostly about inbound links. That became one of the big things. And that sort of set the tone. So it's still very, very much like that. But if you have good content, you should attract good links. I know there's a lot of things other than that, but yeah, was it easy then? It was interesting then because there wasn't one major player in the search engine space, so we weren't all trying to do what Google said. You were doing what Alta Vista said, or what Infoseek said, or what Lycos said, or Yahoo, slightly different because it was a directory rather than an actual search engine. So yeah, there was all sorts of different things you would be doing to try and get your website's top of the list. Primarily, it was about metadata and content and things of that nature. So I don't know if it's any easier then or easier now, but it's the basic principles, I would say, remain the same. If you've got content that people will want to see and find value in, the search engines will reward you for that.
So can you tell the listeners a little bit about your book?
Yes. So a couple of years ago, I wrote the book, Patient Recruitment for Clinical Trials Using Facebook Ads. It was basically because I'd been using Facebook ads a lot. It's not my only speciality. I do a lot of different things within patient recruitment, but it became my forte. It was the one I niched in at first, and I thought there is no book about this. There are books about Facebook ads. There are books about patient recruitment, but in reality, when I put my book out there weren't many books about patient recruitment either. There had been some in the early 2000s, and they were more academic texts, so they were expensive ones. So I thought, okay, there's a gap in the market here for me to put my knowledge into book form. I wrote the book and put it out. It actually became an Amazon bestseller very briefly, which I was quite surprised by, given the niche nature of the subject. But yeah, so I did that, and it includes tips on how to make use of Facebook and digital marketing in general, actually, for patient recruitment, which I hadn't seen anywhere else. Some of the earlier books touched on the fact that the internet existed, but didn't really have much about the internet as being the main means of communication that it is today. So I thought there was a gap there. So I included a lot of principles. So if even, I mean, the book's probably already out of date to an extent. It's not properly. You can read it and you'll get everything the principles are still there, but the way that Facebook looks is slightly different from the screenshots, and it's always evolving. You may have seen some news earlier in the year that you can't target health-related interests now on Facebook. It was never that useful anyway, but it was there. So if, for example, you wanted to target someone with asthma, you might be able to target the Asthma Association or an asthma patient group, that sort of thing, as an interest. I'm not going to go into detail of what that actually means, unless you want me to. But it's explained in the book as well. But it's just the behavior that people have on the internet is how you target by interest. So things have changed a bit, but actually the fundamental principles, I reread the book again the other day just to see that it was still valid. The fundamental principles are all there, and it is, there are other things in there that will help people if they don't know much about how to target patients online.
And is the reason why Facebook is more or better to use, is it more because of the way people use Facebook, or is it just the way that the search engine or the search capability in Facebook works, or the targeting capability works, or what is it that you feel makes it stronger?
I think it's a combination of factors. It's the volume of people. It's mostly used. I mean, there are more people use Google probably, but you can't really tell, and they're certainly not all using it at once in the same way that Facebook's got lots of different users. I'd say nearly half the population of the world is using it. That's even now. That is still the case, that Facebook is the biggest search engine. TikTok, you may have seen the news, overtook it last year in terms of the number of users for the year, people who visited that domain. But Facebook has more users overall. So I think the volume of people is a big factor. The way people use it is also another big factor. People often are not thinking about clinical trials or participating in clinical trials. So when they're on scrolling Facebook, they're looking for pictures of cats or whatever it is, somebody's dinner from the day before, and they see this ad to think, oh, that's interesting. So it lodges in their mind, and they might click to learn more. The other great thing with Facebook is it's shareable. So, for example, if I don't have a particular condition, but I see an advert about a clinical trial for a particular condition, I can think, oh, my sister has this, so I can forward it to her or alert her to it. So it is a social medium in the sense that people do share things and they do tell other people about it. I would say one of the when you can comment on Facebook adverts, and one of the single most likely comments you'll get is someone writing someone else's name to alert them to the ad, so it then shows up in their feed as well. and that's another reason why Facebook is so good. Yeah, in terms of general overall, I would say for digital recruitment purposes, maybe 50% of patients are recruited using Facebook, and then there's a lot of other digital means as well. But it's always been consistently the best performer in my experience, and other people I've spoken to as well.
It's a great sort of testament to the fact that people leverage that platform for lots of things, not just pictures of cats or pictures
Yeah,
of steak the night before, but also sort of researching things. It's funny because um, I more or less converted my Facebook to hobby interests years ago and dropped most everything else that I use it for. And so normally the only time I have it open is whenever I have real downtime, which isn't all that often. I'm
yeah,
normally
yeah.
but yeah, it definitely is a great platform for that. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of a past interview that I did. So there's a guy by the name of Yannick Yazklowski who has an AI platform that kind of sits on top of these social media platforms and looks for signals for people that are having, I believe, any sort of symptoms in a clinical trial. So that's what he's looking for. But essentially it's, just looking at the data that's coming back out similarly. And so whenever you go through kind of a process to get started with somebody, how do they get started in terms of looking at the demographics or the ways that they might be able to use Facebook for recruiting?
Yeah, well, it's based on the trial criteria really. The inclusion exclusion criteria for the trial will be set, and then it will be presented to someone like myself and say, right, we're looking for these people, and it will usually be 18 plus or 18 to 40 or something like that. You then target those people on Facebook, um, and you can go very broad. Often you can just go, we just want people between the ages of 18 to 50, say, who live in particular areas. So you've got demographic and geographic targeting you can do. You can layer on the interest targeting if you wish, but the other factor I didn't mention a second ago is as to why Facebook is so good is it's brilliant at learning. So when you mentioned the AI platform here, it learns very well as to how people react and what sort of people to show the adverts to. So if you set up your process well enough in the first place, so you would say, right, I want to target these people. Once they've filled in the pre-screener form, you would direct them to a pre-screener form for the trial, which includes probably some of the inclusion exclusion criteria. Once they have completed that, so long as you can track those people, which you should be able to do through Facebook or other means, you can then tell Facebook all those people who got through that pre-screener are the type of people I want to target. Facebook has so many thousands of data points about every one of its users. It will then learn based on the data it receives. So the more people sign up for the trial, the better Facebook's targeting. The more people who go through the pre-screen, the better it's targeting. And they will then target people who are more like those people. So that's, yeah. So once you've got the initial criteria you need to target, you can just let Facebook run and it will do its thing and work better. There's lots of things you can do to optimize as you're going along. You can see, right, particular age groups are reacting better. Let's target them instead. Particular advert, the content of the advert is a big factor that people often forget that this is an area of targeting. It's the content of the advert. If I'm scrolling through my Facebook feed and I see adverts for, I don't have a cat, so if I see adverts for cat food, I'm not going to be that interested. But if I see an advert for something that is interesting to me, I will stop and look at it. I always compare it to be like browsing magazines on a newsstand.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not interested in railway magazine, whatever it may be, but if I'm interested in particular music, type musician or whatever, I'll think, there's an article about that person in this week's magazine. I'll look at that one. So you can target the people with the content as much as you can by the demographics or anything else.
It's interesting. I guess the other question I would have is that whenever you run across let's say an ad to bring you into a clinical trial, um, how does that normally look? I mean, does it say, hey, by the way, if you have, kind of plain text, if you have these symptoms or this malady, you might be interested in this, or what does it normally look like?
The advert itself usually would be something of that nature. There's lots of different types of ads you can do on Facebook. Facebook's always pushing their video ads.
Hmm.
What I've found is that single image ads, the most common type of advert on Facebook, still work better than anything else. This is on your news feed. So there are other ads on Facebook and like small text ads, but the ones that seem to work best, well, have consistently worked best, are images with text on them, which are the ones you're probably most familiar with when you scroll through Facebook. It looks like a Facebook post. Um,
Okay.
and it will be an image with a headline and some text above it. So that's what it would usually be, and the content would usually say something like the standard default one would be XYZ, or we are looking for people with such and such condition, asthma, to take part in a clinical trial. You can get more creative than that, but that's basically what you're looking for, to try and self-identify the people, because you only want people with a particular condition unless you're going for healthy volunteers, but in which case you'll say we're looking for healthy volunteers to
Mhm.
take part in a phase 1 clinical trial or something like that. So yeah, the content of the ad would be upfront about what you're asking for. Two reasons for that, really. One, Facebook's own regulations. They want you to be pretty direct and specific, and they don't want you to direct someone to something that isn't what it says it is on the ad. And also the ethics committees, or IRBs, the institutional review boards, will also have a say in what you can actually put out there to attract people onto the trial. If it's an actual trial that you're actually promoting for, which mostly it would be, you'd have to have this ethics approval. So again, they want you to be upfront and direct about what you're saying.
Sure. So you've also written a couple of recent LinkedIn articles. Can you tell us a little bit about, what are you writing about, and what are some of the popular topics with people that pick up things from you from LinkedIn?
Sure. So yeah, I've been writing for quite a while. I've been writing my own blog, and I've been putting stuff on LinkedIn. And then this year, I made a conscious effort to promote the LinkedIn articles a bit more. It's despite the fact I've got something of a speciality in Facebook, I spend more time on LinkedIn than anything else. In a professional capacity, that works much better for me. And I made a conscious effort to promote articles on there more this year. And I started the year with one that was very popular and attracted a lot of interest, talking about what are the most effective patient recruitment and retention strategies that you can use this year for actually getting patients onto trials. And it had a range of things included, digital advertising, Facebook advertising, but also it was about reaching out to healthcare professionals, utilizing patient advocacy groups, all sorts of different techniques for how you can put your message out there to get people into the trials, including grassroots outreach, all the different methods. And that attracted a lot of interest, a lot of comments, which has been very interesting to see what people are saying, and lots of different viewpoints. Um, there's been a big buzz phrase over the last couple of years. I mean, it's been around for a while, but certainly more so the last couple of years, about decentralized trials.
Sure.
Um, and that is, for me, it's one of the things that is a key factor in helping people to get onto trials, is giving them the choice of how they do it, how they actually participate. Is we're trying to make them. I'm certainly trying to make the activity of patient recruitment more consumer led, rather than treatment led. My latest LinkedIn post actually is about that. I put that on earlier today, which is about um, patient recruitment and retention should be viewed as a marketing activity, not a clinical one. So I believe that I've seen it. It's when clinicians are devising methods for recruiting patients onto trial, it's based on, well, we want to get them to fulfill these criteria. We've got all these endpoints we need to hit. We've got all this data we need to gather. So that's what we need to do. forgetting the fact that it's actually people who are taking part in the trial, and to reach out to the people, there has to be something they have to answer the question, what's in it for me? At the same time, they have to realize, they have to know that there is not such a burden on them
Sure.
to take part, which unfortunately, when you're measuring data, you don't necessarily see what this burden could be. I've worked on trials where, there's been 3 or 4 visits to a research site before you even get onto the trial. And it's just incredible to think that people putting themselves through these, you are putting people off from the outset. So the decentralization idea, I think, if you can get people to not have to attend a site, you automatically can keep more people on the trial, and also you can reach a wider audience. When we're targeting, whether it's Facebook or anything, you're targeting people who can travel to a research site. Now that sort of limits it to 30 miles, 40 miles, 50 miles maybe around where the site is, whether it's a hospital or university. But if you can have some sort of decentralization where, for example, the local doctor, a local doctor's surgery, is able to administer the trial on behalf of the principal investigator, they could be 1,000 miles away. So you can automatically increase the reach for who can participate. Also, it makes it easier for the person not to have to travel. There's lots of ideas with home visits, wearable technology. People often focus on the technology when they talk about decentralized, but I think it's as much about patient choice as it is about technology. So all these things are what I've been writing about, how to make it what we call patient centric, which is probably a bit of a cliche, but people have been talking about that for so long, and not really putting it into practice. Whereas the technology and the will now exists to try and do this. So the articles I've written this year, they're on LinkedIn, primarily about those sort of things. I also did a prediction for what might be the most effective strategies 10 years from now, written as though it was 2032 already, and looking back at the ways that people could recruit patients onto trials using things like the metaverse or whatever other technology is going to come into play by then. I'm also hoping in my prediction that more doctors, more healthcare professionals will be inclined to put patients forward for trials. And one of the methods for doing this is by the sharing of the health records. I see no reason why you shouldn't be allowed to, if you are a patient, have people sharing the record. Obviously, it's got to be choice and there's got to be privacy factors involved. But if people want to and they're interested in clinical trials, through education, hopefully people will learn that that's a good idea. Then yeah, this could be where we're heading in 10 years, and I'm very much hoping we are.
Definitely could be a challenge getting people to share, data as well, just in terms of, um, just what people think about sharing data. It's funny because there are certain elements of my data where I've told people, look, as of today, I don't really care about this element of my data. One example could be how I use my telephone, my smartphone. Today, I don't
Yep.
really care about that, but who knows what 10 years in the future could be. And then if companies are using that to target certain things and, drive certain things my way, because of that, it could become, kind of a challenge on the opposite end. But there's so much good, I feel like, that could come from especially decentralized trials. And then in addition to that, having the ability to have, if you don't need a patient to travel to a site for some reason, um, then wouldn't it be great to have them do stuff, at home? And I don't know that it's necessarily through technology or whatever, but I mean, to me, it's almost like, the more that we can do this and open it up, the better, because then it sort of overcomes some of the challenges as well with regards to diversifying trials, too. And it just seems like there's a real opportunity there.
No, I definitely agree. It opens up to different communities, opens up to different people. There are all sorts of different solutions. I think technology is one that people have been focusing on a lot, but a more old school approach is having nurse visits into a home. You can do that. I know it's resource intensive, but you can arrange these things. Um, there's also a step prior to that where the design of the trial could be made easier and less burdensome. Is it actually necessary to have all these data points? Do you actually really need all this data? I know it's been talked about quite a lot recently that some trial protocols are simply copied and pasted from previous ones in a similar therapy area. Um, when you think, well, actually, do they need to be? On the other side of it, do you need all this data? On the other side of it, uh, a lot of trials seem to be, the way I see it, seem to be set up to pass the test so that they actually are going to make sure, oh, well, this is great. So they want, people with diabetes with a very low BMI, all this kind of thing. And it's almost limiting the number of people this treatment would be useful for anyway.
Mhm.
So I think ideally what we'd have is treatments that are universally useful for as many people as possible with a particular condition. Um, and I know you need to gather lots of data for that, but do you need to gather so much data that the burden on the patient attending the trial is too restrictive?
So, I mean, just a great point. I mean, I think I, I think at the end of the day, it would also be helpful to understand from even the regulatory bodies what specifically, are you looking for in the next round? If you want let's say today's epilepsy drug to be the same as the one for the next decade, then it's a bit of a challenge for for the regulators as well as for the anybody that's going through the clinical trial, because most likely you're going to have to gather the same amounts of data as any previous drug. However, if certain parameters have kind of already been, decided or could be decided in a way that requires less data, I completely see your point. I mean, is an opportunity to, sort of expand things and, maybe take away less of the copy and paste, but at the same time, sort of be smart about how are we going to run this next clinical trial as well.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that what some there's a using a virtual trial where which is not the same as decentralized trials, virtual trial based on just analyzing the data that already exists without having to get an actual patient on it can actually help with those kind of things because you can already set some parameters based on the information you've already got.
Yeah, for sure. So right now you work for a company called Prime Global. It took me a little bit to get that out. So
Yeah.
what does Prime Global do?
Yeah, Prime Global is a medical communications and market access agency that has also built up a patient center of excellence and also recently added with a health economics and real world evidence agency as well. So it's offering a lot of things to the life sciences, pharma industry effectively. Um, Started as medical communications and then has expanded into doing lots of different things that are relevant to try and effectively achieve the best outcomes for patients. I was brought on board last year into the patient team. Um, so patient engagement was where they started off with the patient team. Then I was brought on board for patient recruitment to expand that. So what I'm doing is spending a lot of time talking to people about the best solutions that they can offer for their trials to actually make them work better. So we can do some stuff in-house. We've got a digital team that's very good at that, and certainly Facebook ads is one of the things that we're very good at. Also other digital and social media, but also I'm in touch with lots of different people. I'm always listening out for new solutions that can be used, whether it's decentralized or otherwise. Um, One of my LinkedIn articles from I think it was last week was about of the range of different solutions that are available in case people are not aware of what they are. And this is about talking to people who manage the trials and saying, okay, well, what you're doing at the moment for patient recruitment and retention is not working that well. Let's have a look at this, try this bit, try that. that bit isn't working at all, so shut that bit down and then replace it with these things. And it's basically consultancy role and advisory role to try and get the best outcomes for people who may not know that there are things around that they could use.
So one of the things that also came to mind for me is, what are some of the bigger challenges that people are running into today with regards to clinical trials?
Yeah, I mean, patient recruitment is a perennial one. It always surprises me that since I started in the industry several years ago, it's always surprised me that that is still such a problem because it's such a well-funded industry and they haven't cracked this. Well, my post today was about, I think the reason is because it's viewed from a clinical viewpoint rather than a marketing one. Um, Specific problems, though, COVID has certainly caused a problem. Here in the UK, we've dropped all our restrictions now. There are no COVID restrictions in place, particularly, so you don't have to wear masks and that sort of thing. So there's advisory, but it's not actually that you have to. I know that's not the case everywhere around the world, but that certainly caused an issue for everything I was working on. Stopped. All the trials just stopped in March last. Was it last year? Is it 2 years ago? 2 years ago now. Blimey, 2 years ago. Literally 2 years to the day, isn't it? So yeah, so that's caused an issue, and I don't think that's going to come back very quickly. But people did look at other solutions, which is where decentralization has become much more a priority for people, despite the fact, decentralized trials have been around for, well, almost 15 years. They could have been doing them, but anyway, it's the industry has finally caught up to that. So that's a challenge. I think, sadly, I fear the industry has missed an opportunity. There was a lot of positive thoughts and positive media about pharmaceutical companies and the industry as a whole during COVID. I don't think we've managed to capitalize on that as well as we might, sadly, because that would have been a great opportunity. Um, One of the things there, I think, is the way that people view the pharmaceutical industry. Well, sorry, the way that people view clinical trials has come more into focus. It's quite likely that 2 years ago, the majority of people in the world did not know that clinical trials even existed, whereas now everybody in the world knows that there is such a thing as a clinical trial.
Yeah.
They may not know that there's a clinical trial for their own condition. That's one of
Mm.
the issues that we always have. So everyone's aware that there was a clinical trial for COVID, etc., and there have been, but they may not know that, well, I've got asthma, so maybe there's not a clinical trial for me. They may not make that step. I'm pretty sure 10 years ago, before I started to get involved with trials, I was probably aware that they existed, but did I pay much attention to it? Would it have occurred to me that there was a whole industry around there? Maybe not. And I think the industry has had that opportunity, but I fear it may have blown it. Unfortunately, we could have done a lot better job um, to encourage people. But on the other side of that, some of the challenges there, yeah, I think we can overcome those challenges. Better education, better operations for trials is one that needs to happen. So people are more concerned now about going into research sites. Would you want to go into a hospital to have a clinical trial administered when you know that there's a COVID ward at the end of the corridor?
Mm.
You might think twice about doing that. So yeah, I think there are challenges there that do need to be overcome.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of longer term challenges, do you think the challenges will stay the same, or do you think they'll shift over time?
I think they'll probably stay the same, and there'll be new ones that will come up. I think there's one of the big challenges that you see on the ground with clinical trials, or I'm talking about the site level, say, is the technology that's there, the number of different pieces of software and systems that the sites actually use in order to administer a trial is increasing. And it should really be decreasing. There should really be some kind of centralization of this data. Having more data is a very good thing, but it shouldn't be that you have to log into 8 different programs to actually record the data. So
Yeah.
that's the challenge for administering trials, and I think that's probably going to get worse before it gets better. because all these new solutions are coming into the market. And for whatever reason, nobody has yet standardized the basic platform in the way that, say, Microsoft did with Windows, or Apple has its own stuff, or Google with Android. I know that there was all sorts of different systems and platforms in the mobile phone industry, the cell phone industry, over the years, and they've kind of coalesced into just two now. But well, perhaps just more than two. I still use a BlackBerry, but it's on Android. So it's the money that went into that and the tech solutions that came in were able to actually change things to make it easier for everybody. That needs to come into pharma, which is pretty much behind the rest of the well-funded industries as far as I can see. Other long-term problems for clinical trials, again, I think the reputation is going to go back downhill a bit and people don't trust. But there's a lot of good people in the industry, and I think there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to have clinical trials as a care option become quite normal over the next, let's say, 10 years. I wish that, I hope that does happen. It isn't there. It's nowhere near there at the moment, but I would like to see it. The problem is getting doctors to know that there is a clinical trial and then put their patients forward is not going to go away. They're time restricted. They're going to have less time in the future. So it's a balance of what they can spend the time on. Is a clinical trial top of their mind? Probably not. Can we make it so? Maybe.
Yeah, I know I've supported the idea as well of having artificial intelligence that helps to guide physicians. Um, I know there's a bit of resistance because there's a belief that artificial intelligence is just going to take over. But at the end of the day, having an empathetic physician or somebody that really understands your care pathway is something that I believe can't easily be replaced by automation. So this is where I kind of keep coming back to look, I mean, if there are 50 to 60 new drugs that get released every year, there's an opportunity that somebody could find a new drug that actually treats something for somebody a lot better if there's a computer on the other end thinking about that. And I would think the same thing with regards to clinical trials. There's just probably an opportunity that, hey, look, if we run out of options in the current environment, maybe there's another way to take this, and you go join a clinical trial that actually might benefit you in the end if you're a part of it.
I definitely agree, and I think that would be great if that happened. And one of the bright things there is, one of the things that is possibly going to happen, going to evolve anyway, is the fact that younger generations actually are much more familiar with using their smartphones and doing things online and doing things via apps. Probably, has anyone under the age of 25 ever been into a bank, for example? That sort of thing. This is going to be a very different future, and people will be more used to having smart tech that tells them, artificial intelligence diagnosing them even, and people will be more familiar with that. People perhaps 40 and up, not so much, but I think there's always going to be room for the personal touch, actual the bedside manner of the doctor, the doctor actually having that warmth and that relationship. It's going to last a long time, but younger people and people who are born today, in 20 years' time, will they be that bothered about having a local doctor? I mean, I think I'm seeing some statistics that say that a lot of people under 20 don't even have a doctor that they're registered with.
I know I've gone down that pathway in the U.S. as well, where we have enough clinics in an area where you can walk in the door and get a physical, and you can walk in the door with a cold and get treated that way. And we certainly have gone down that pathway whenever family physicians or healthcare providers that we need just aren't as easily accessible. So, I've just lived in parts of the world, and one of them is Maryland, in the U.S. On the East Coast. family physicians were hard to come by, and it was a
Yeah.
lot easier to drive down the street to a clinic and just say, hey, look, I have this problem, or I need a physical or whatever. And we just didn't have a family doctor. It was hard to answer that question though. If you went into the hospital and all of a sudden they ask you, so who's your family doctor? It's like, I don't really have one. So
Yeah, and the not having access to central health records again is an issue there. So I think if we can do that, there's a big move in the UK to try and get that, but it's been like that for 20 or 30 years, and perhaps maybe we're on the cusp of it. But
yeah. So I have 3 questions that I ask every guest. Ross, what inspires you?
yeah, I was thinking about this, and I think it's the most of the things that inspire me do with how people are, what people do. There's obvious things going on in Ukraine at the moment, and some of the reactions that people have been quite inspirational. I mean, it's not just that in my own industry, the industry we're in, the inspirational people who get out of bed every day to try and make other people's lives better without much reward for themselves. You just think, wow, this is incredible. These people are inspiring. Try and do this to help other people, and whether it's from their own background experience has led them to it. It doesn't matter. What they're actually doing is inspirational. I also thought, Paul McCartney is going to be headlining the Glastonbury Festival this year, and he's 80 years old when he's going to be doing it. Now that's pretty inspirational as well to be doing that at the age of 80. So yeah, what the things that people do are what inspire me.
I think, I mean, at least for me, but throughout most of Paul McCartney's life, for most of my adult life, it doesn't seem like he's aged all that much. So
Now,
he's doing something right. So on that side of things,
yeah, I think you're right there.
what concerns you?
Yeah, well, Ukraine is obviously a concern, and then how that may develop. But it's not just there, obviously. I mean, there's lots of flashpoints around the world and lots of terrible things happening around the world. So it's a concern in general. It's a concern. It's almost a cliche, that, isn't it? It's a concern that everybody would have. I am concerned about where our industry is going. The fact that we have perhaps not taken advantage of the goodwill that was generated maybe a year ago and 18 months ago, perhaps with the vaccine development. So I'm concerned about that. Yeah, I suppose I'm concerned about the economic effects of things now. It must be happening in the US. In the UK, we've got a big cost of living crisis now with everything's rising, the oil prices, gas prices, people's energy in the home was it 200% price rises, all sorts of things going on. And now it's going to get even worse. So that is a major concern, that there is a knock-on effect for our industry as well, because when people can't heat their home or eat well, there's a generational effect of bad health.
Yeah. Yeah. I certainly, as well care about the, how things might turn out, for the world. I really, sympathize though with those poor people in Ukraine and everything that's going on there. And I'm glad, at least from a NATO response standpoint, that they have responded the way that they have. And, if it causes some immediate suffering for me, I'm sure it's nowhere near what
Oh
they're
no,
going through
no.
in that country. So, yeah, I just, I think all of us sit and kind of wonder what could possibly happen, if we were to fast forward 6 months from now. What are things going to look like then, and what happens with this crisis? So, I certainly hope that things turn out better than they currently are, and that there's little economic impact, going forward. But I don't have a crystal ball either.
Well,
What?
no, and there was a worst possible outcome, isn't there? That we're all hoping is
Oh, sure.
nowhere near what happened
Right.
to us.
Yeah. And Ross, what excites you?
Yeah, again, now what excites me, I was thinking about this as well. I was like, what does excite me? So yeah, I think there's things in general that excite me that are also connected to the stuff that's going on in the industry as well. I think things things like the metaverse do excite me to an extent from the digital background. Perhaps this is where that comes in. I'm not talking about Facebook's idea of the metaverse. I'm talking about the in general, and I think it at the same time it's horrifying and exciting, because there's, you can use anything for good or bad. But I think there are lots of great opportunities with that sort of technology. So the way technology has just increased and increased, and the pace of change is accelerating as more things happen, and more all those things happen. So those things are exciting, those things that are possibly on the horizon. I think in healthcare, there's a lot of great stuff being done. Individualized treatments, even all the stuff that people have been talking about for a long time is almost there now. I think
Mhm.
the stuff that's going on with the nuclear fusion, you think, wow, that could be very interesting if they can actually get that working. Again, it's always been, I think they always say it's about 10 years away or something like that, and it's still about 10 years away. But yeah, all those technological advances are exciting. What else excites me? Sometimes I'm excited just to get out of bed in the morning and think, yeah, great, it's a nice day, sunny day. It's exciting to
Yeah.
um, be in the world. I think it's a good thing to be.
Yeah, it's definitely a great time. I mean, especially in life sciences. I mean, I'm excited by all the technology too that we have. I mean, from artificial intelligence. What's funny is that so if you rewind the clock more than 10 years ago in my career, I remember people saying this word that I couldn't say, and I kept asking them, and then they would break it down, and then they would say, well, just call it a MAB, monoclonal antibody. And so I constantly would try and, like, talk about this technology that
Mhm.
was coming, for healthcare. And, and lo and behold, here we are in the midst of COVID, and all of a sudden they start saying, well, hey, look, we could actually pump your body filled with antibodies without having to go through, the process of being vaccinated. You could get a dose of antibodies a different way. And here's the technology. And it just was amazing to me to kind of see move from that part of, here's a concept, here's something that I know I saw and heard about in a lab. I heard, plenty of discussions about papers and other things. And then here it
Mhm.
is. And, so, in part, be, because of great work that you and, the different teams that you work with that are doing, clinical trials, brought that to life, right? I mean, otherwise it wouldn't have been able to be put into a patient. So thank you
I
for,
think that is very exciting. I mean, I can't claim any credit for that, but yes, it is very exciting. I think one of the things that you also that also highlights is the collaboration within
yeah.
the industry that really probably wasn't there to the same extent before COVID, which now it's opened the door to that,
Mm.
which is good. So there's a lot more siloing previously. I think now people are open to the idea of collaboration because the outcomes are better for everybody. So I think that's another exciting change, an exciting development.
Absolutely. So, Ross, before we go, the one thing I like to also ask everybody is, how can they get in touch with you? If somebody really wanted to get in touch with you after the show, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I keep my LinkedIn URL as Ross Jackson Marketing because I believe that what I specialize in is a marketing discipline. So I'm on LinkedIn there. I've got my own website, rossjackson.co.uk, or I'm ross.jackson@primeglobalpeople.com, or ross@rossjackson.co.uk. So there's all sorts of ways you can get in touch with me. LinkedIn's possibly the easiest because it's you can find me there and direct message, or it's got my emails on and things like that.
Perfect. Well, Ross Jackson, thank you so much for being a guest on the Life Science Success Podcast. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much, John. I've enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it, and last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.